The beginning of the first reset of Earth was created with polarity. And the reason that Earth was created in the first place was a reaction to the Orion Wars. So if you think about the movie Star Wars, that's basically a documentary. So the Orion Wars were quite traumatic, and a lot of beings passed away during that time, and a planet actually passed away as well. And I think it was called Tiamat, but I can't remember for sure. So you may have to look it up. But that planet imploded. And basically the core of it was brought inward. And anybody that was in proximity to that planet was pulled in to it as it went away. So that soul's body, because every planet is a soul, that body imploded. And the reaction to that was to create a communication planet so that people would communicate with each other, beings would communicate, and there wouldn't be all that polarity anymore. So that was the reaction. And it was beautiful. And it was in the fifth density and in the fifth dimension. And the first beings that were humanoid that lived on that planet were the Titans. And the Titans were not as respectful of the planet as had been hoped. They really were not taking good care of the planet. So the surface of the planet was being messed with. It wasn't being respected. And the Pleiadians, who had helped to create a lot of the plant life and the flora and fauna, so also the animal life on planet Earth, were very upset. So the Titans and the Pleiadians went to war. And that was the first reset. So when that happened, it created complete chaos on the surface of the planet. The mother trees were cut down. Just a lot of horrible stuff happened during that. And it dropped the consciousness enough that one of the beings, who was kind of what I would call a chaos being, highly traumatized and highly aware of how creation actually works, pushed Earth down into a lower density and a lower dimension because she was vulnerable in that moment. So after that happened, water covered the Earth for a little while. So that was the first reset and the most traumatic. After that, humanity agreed to be the beings that occupied Earth. So they were the Sumerians. They were a bit larger, and they were extremely sovereign. And they had 12 strands of DNA completely activated. Now, the Anunnaki came and they wanted gold, and they did have a planet that needed the gold for the atmosphere, but they also were highly addicted to gold. And they used it for their body, and they behaved very badly to keep getting it. So when they arrived, they were from the fourth density, and half of the Anunnaki dropped in consciousness, and the other half maintained. So you had the good and the bad Anunnaki. So they were really rough on the Sumerians. They wanted them to be their slaves, basically, and be their minors. And the Sumerians were not having it. So they said no to that. And that's when experimentation began. So the DNA manipulation of humanity began during the Sumerian times. And it was created by the Anunnaki. So that was seen as extremely negative by the creator beings who had created Earth. And also, Source is always consulted because it's Source's body. Every single thing that we see in our own bodies, ourselves, and our consciousness comes from Source. So, Source was not pleased with that either and wanted it to be changed. So, the Earth was reset. And it was reset with an enormous flood. And some of the ETs, the higher versions, came in and actually created arcs. And those would be spaceship arcs. And then there was different boats, I think, that were made. These feel much more advanced than wooden boats. Were there some wooden boats? Yes. But they don't feel like that was all there was. So the DNA survived a lot of it, that great flood. Noah's flood. And the next civilization was the Egypt that nobody really knows about. So I call this Egypt, and I call it the first Egypt, and that was in the United States and in the Americas. And basically, you can see it everywhere. Huge pyramids that are the size of mountains, and basically made out of the bodies of the Titans, a lot of them. And it wasn't just the Titans fighting, it was also enormous dragons, and it was kind of like a fantasy nightmare when Earth fell. So all of that matter turned into land and mountains and different things. And you can still see the giant tree stumps today. But that first civilization after the Great Flood was what I would call the first Egypt. So that was going on. I believe that's the first time that we experienced the Son of God coming down. And I think that was the first trauma when it comes to him not being cared for, him being eliminated. So after that, there was another reset. This one feels like a stone reset, like a melted experience. And not everything was completely ruined, but most of it was. And there wasn't, it didn't populate the whole planet, this ancient Egypt. It just populated the Americas. It feels like a swath. And there was dots of it in other places, but there was not that much of it everywhere. Like, it didn't encompass the whole area that we know at this point. and there was a lot of melting going on. So that is what happened, and I believe it was a pretty traumatic reset as well. And then the next civilization was Atlantis and Mu, or Lemuria. So those two came very close together, and they did touch each other in different ways, but they stayed fairly separate until the knowledge of a certain kind of crystal was basically coveted by Atlantis, and a princess was stolen from Lemuria, and she was taken to Atlantis along with this beautiful red crystal. So Atlantis had been doing lots of experiments on humans. The Anunnaki were becoming smaller and smaller. It was like in the movies as far as how grand it was, but there was a lot of seedy underbelly and a lot of experimentation, which was basically against God. So it wasn't done along with the universal laws. They were not being honored. So the way that was remedied was that the princess was taken. She was in Atlantis. She was there for quite some time. The story goes, and this one is not my story, that came from my higher self, but my higher self said, yes, it's true. So that princess was imprisoned for 60 years, and they kept trying to get her to show them how to use the crystal. So she finally used the crystal, but she did it in the midst of Atlantis, which was an enormous civilization. So she basically exploded the crystal, and that took out the majority of the civilization, like the top city. And after that, things kind of morphed a bit with the other ones. But Atlantis was the divine partner of Atlas. So Atlantis was not only a city or a civilization, it was also a being. And she wasn't doing so well. So when her civilization exploded, she exploded. And the soul became fractured and basically spread out all across the universe. Little pieces. So think about glass. She shattered like glass. So Atlas was extraordinarily unhappy and upset that things had gone so far and become so negative. And all of his pain caused the Ice Age. So then that was another reset. And then we moved into Roman times. And in Rome, there were many giants and there were humans. So small people and very large people. These giants, I get, would be up to 25 feet tall. So ancient Rome still had Anunnaki, and they were very, very big. So that was a civilization that didn't get completely reset. It just began to morph into Tartaria. So Tartaria had domed buildings, just like Rome had domed buildings. Tartaria became a bit more refined, also a bit more gaudy. I mean, there were a lot of extremely extravagant buildings on the inside as well. And they had a lot of time to make these buildings more and more extravagant. And then in 1797, we lost another skirmish, we're going to call it. We lost another war. And that became a huge reset. So that brought us into the mud flood, which was a liquefaction event. And it was done worldwide, but in certain areas it was more extreme than others. And there are buildings today that are partially buried, that are still used. And there's also a lot of underground facilities. And some of that is part of the buried buildings. A lot of it is underground things that were created for nefarious reasons. So we have a lot of that as well. And we have modern versions of that, just like we have ancient versions of that. So when that reset happened, everything was empty, especially in the Americas. And the world had to be repopulated again, especially in the Americas. So when they did that, they brought in incubator babies. And they were created in these tunnel systems. And the narrative was the Cabbage Patch. The Cabbage Patch Kid. And we also had orphan trains that brought children in. So where did they come from? A lot of them came from Europe, but a lot of them came from underground. And this reset lasted for an entire century, basically. So it started in 1797, and they continued to reset until the World's Fairs were basically over, and those extreme fires happened all over in these large cities. So the Chicago World's Fair, and I believe it was just before the turn of the century, it was a beautiful white city, and it actually had cactus. So weather was not manipulated at that point. And we were still in the terrarium that we will go back to. So we actually live under the firmament, and the terrarium type weather will come back in as things stop being manipulated. So we went from the World's Fairs, where they actually admitted a lot of things. You know, around this time, they showed the Cabbage Patch Kids, the incubator babies, they had the orphan trains, and then they had this magnificent World Fairs going on. And directly after that, and a few of them were before that, were these great fires. So each fire that's shown here was in a different city. And all the big cities burned, even though they were made with brick and stone. So now we don't have as many of these beautiful buildings that came from Tartaria. The star forts have all been obscured in some way. So you have to really look closely to see that you're on a star fort or you're near one. A lot of the beautiful cathedral buildings are just gone. So we have a lot that are left as well that were left alone. And those are in the mix of the brutalist architecture that they brought in. They went from the most beautiful, amazing architecture, and it was all powered by the ether, and everybody had better technology, mostly, than we have now. But we went from that beauty to the brutalist style, which does not light up the soul. So now we're in the last reset. We're about to see it really happen. And I don't think it will have anything to do with the chaos that we've seen in the past. We're not going to see a wipeout of anything. We're going to see the beauty start to come through as the systems go away. So most of you know that the 3D is being taken down right now. And what we have to look forward to is a 5th dimensional consciousness that is beginning to come in. And we're already back in the 5th density. And the beings that pushed Earth down in the first place have now gone home to God and been turned back to pure energy. So as these systems go, and that's going to be governments, medical systems, school systems, so educational systems, and the church. People will be in touch with God one-on-one. They will have better systems for health. Everyone will have wealth, and eventually money will disappear because we won't need it. Other societies do not use money, and I'm talking about universal societies. And governments will become very, very small. And they will be actually run by the people. So we're in that process right now, and you can see it when you look out into the world and you see the chaos. And that chaos has a purpose. And the purpose is that we as humanity are becoming free. So as freedom grows and sovereignty grows, which comes from within, the outside world will match that. And all the technologies that have been hidden will begin to filter back in. They already are. They're already coming in. So this will be the last reset. And I believe that Earth will just continue to grow and flourish from now on, because we're coming out of polarity, and we will go back to the point where Earth becomes the place where people learn, beings learn to communicate with each other again. It won't necessarily be absolutely perfect, but it will be so much better, and it will be a grand adventure. And we will say, as time goes on, Oh, I'm from Earth. Where are you from?